Since Xanathar's Guide to Everything has come out, and it's been out for a while now, people have become pretty familiar with it. There are a lot of cool things inside, and some maybe less cool, with which you, the players, can build characters. However, there is a rising interest in the idea of playing a class in an unorthodox way. Not all barbarians have to be big tough guys who get really angry, not all wizards have to be spending hours and hours in libraries poring over tomes, and not all rogues gotta eat to live, gotta steal to eat, otherwise we'd get along. Why don't we take a look at how we can re-flavor some of these classes and make them into a different character type, while still retaining the abilities and party status as the originals. I had a cool idea for the Bard class earlier. Bards get this ability called Magical Secrets, which allows them to take spells from another class's spell list and make them into Bard spells. The Bard's base ability set gives them this ability twice in their lifespan, and if you take College of Lore, it adds another instance of it. So there's a possibility that a level 20 Bard can have stolen up to like 6 spells that belong to other classes. Some 3rd level, 5th level, and 9th level spells. So, what if you had a Bard who was trying their best to impersonate a member of another class? A clerical impersonator might, for instance, take spells like Revivify, Mass Healing Word, Mass Cure Wounds, Commune, Mass Heal, and True Resurrection from the cleric's spell list with their magical secrets, and bolster that list with the bard spells like Cure Wounds, Enhance Ability, Healing Word, Zone of Truth, Lesser and Greater Restoration, Raise Dead, Regenerate, Resurrection, and Power Word Heal. That sounds like a pretty solid priestly type spell list for me. Their Bardic Inspiration, ability that they could invoke by maybe saying some limerick or poem that invokes the idea of a deity, but is really just the Bard's inspiring performance that helps. Cutting Words, which is the special ability that you get from Lore College, could be flavored as some kind of malediction against the enemy, calling down the wrath of a deity upon them, when it's really just them swearing at them and telling them that they suck or something. Their Song of Rest ability they can do by singing hymns or reciting mantras. If the Bard's performance skill is high enough, he could convince people that he was, in fact, a priest of some unknown deity that's been awakened once more and seeks followers to the cause. The priest's Channel Divinity ability to turn undead would be hard to emulate, pretty tricky, but if you can trick enough people into thinking you're actually a priest of a non-existent deity, then maybe you could use something like Thunder Wave and a good performance check, and some luck on the dice will allow you to push a bunch of undead around you away violently, with a crash of what you will certainly convince others is Divine Thunder, and hopefully destroy any of the weaker undead that fail the save and are pushed back. Anything that does make the save, you can blame on your followers for not believing hard enough. Your god is still weak from his long slumber, and he needs the exaltation and worship of its followers to truly return to strength. The Divine Intervention ability can be faked using the Commune spell, and making a grand show of it as you do so. These people that are watching you don't need to know that you invoke a different demi-deific figure each time you cast it, or that the one you keep calling up is getting annoyed that you call it by the wrong name or whatever. I mean, sure, it won't have exactly the same effect as the actual Divine Intervention would, with the deity themselves showing up and punching the undead beholder dragon or whatever hybrid in the face, but statistically you'll have a higher success rate at contacting your deity than normal priests would. After all, they have a chance to fail their divine intervention at a rate much higher than you have a chance of failing your commune spell. So you can play a bard as a cult leader, a sort of charlatan egoist, whose initial aim is to gather up a following and then live a cushy life off of their backs, occasionally doing some kind of miracle or another to prove that he is, in fact, the chosen one of this imaginary deity. It would make for great drama, for your party to not even know that's what's happening, and for you and your DM to sort of work out a little code for the ability that you want to use. The Favor of Stellan Ra or whoever for your inspiration, or Wake the Sleeping God for cutting words. The first few sessions, you could try not to use anything that a priest couldn't do as well to leave it ambiguous. And when your party figures out what's actually happened, which any savvy party will in a short time, you can play it through and see what happens for drama and comedy. But what if you wanted to impersonate another class? You could do worse than trying to be a ranger. In fact, a bard might actually kind of be a better ranger than a ranger is. Spellcasting-wise, rangers don't get 5th level spells until level 17, but bards get 5th level spells at level like 9, 10? This means that a lore bard who steals spells from the ranger's spell list has access to the entirety of their spell list by level 10, when they would get their 2nd instance of magical secrets. A ranger's highest level spells, stuff like Steel Wind Strike and Tree Stride and Commune with Nature, are child's play to a bard. I mean, you'd take the stereotypical spells that rangers would also have as well, things like Hunter's Mark and Lightning Arrow with your first magical secrets, and then take Freedom of Movement, Pass Without a Trace, Swift Quiver, Conjure Volley. Your own bard spells have enough crossover with rangers that you could pretty reliably reproduce a decent, if perhaps slightly subpar, ranger's arsenal. Taking the extra proficiencies that lore gives you, you should look at nature, survival, and animal handling. And then the ranger's favored enemy ability is basically useless, honestly, save for the extra language that you get in dealing with them, so you can really disregard that. Anything you'd need to deal with languages you can approximate with Comprehend Languages early game and Tongues later game. The Natural Explorer ability is admittedly a little bit harder to emulate, but it can be done with the use of spells and creative lying. You only need to convince others that you're good at these things. When you're alone, you can bumble about and be stupid all you like, but when other people are around, that's when you have to convince them, right? As for a fighting style, it's not hard to fool others into thinking that you're good with a bow if you have a high enough dex score, as bards should. I mean, you're already proficient with short bows as part of your simple weapons proficiency, so you could use True Strike as one of your bard cantrips to give yourself that little boost that you could explain away simply as the necessity to aim well before shooting. The easiest archetype for ranger to emulate is, of course, the hunter archetype, so we're going to try to fake that. Their ability Colossus Slayer does an extra bit of damage to something when you do damage to it with a weapon, so you can use Hunter's Mark to approximate that. Now granted, they would normally stack, but nobody needs to know that. Escape the Horde can't really exactly be approximated, but you can use your Cutting Words to get a similar effect, to cause the one that's attacking you with an attack of opportunity to be less good at the attack. The Ranger's level 11 multi-attack is also a little bit difficult, but with your early access to spells like Conjure Volley and Swift Quiver, it can be done. Uncanny Dodge halves an attacker's damage against you, which is probably the best quality that a ranger gets, not like a rogue doesn't get it too, so your best bet is either to steal the shield spell in addition to whatever other spells you might want to have stolen, or to use your Cutting Words to either reduce their attack roll or the damage done by that attack. The bard's ability to emulate this class convincingly ends slightly earlier than the clerical emulation, because later game ranger is actually full of abilities that do little things here and there, but you could pull off a convincing ranger for a short while at least. Maybe you stumbled into the wrong part of a forest or a glade, and it was under the protection of some rangers that didn't like outsiders, and so you had to lie and say that you were also a ranger in order to keep yourself from being turned out or killed. And so you've had to sort of keep up the ruse for so long that it's kind of become second nature for you to simply tell everybody that, yeah, you're definitely a ranger, despite knowing that you're really just kind of pretending and making do. Eventually, you know that your masquerade is gonna fall apart, and you'll have to deal with that fact, but for now, at least you're safe. Let's get off of bards for now, though, because this video could literally turn into how bards are better at everything than everyone else. I want to turn an eye toward the barbarian for a moment, and see how they can be played outside their normal stereotype. The main abilities for barbarians are Rage, Damage Reduction, and terrifying amounts of damage done. The trope of barbarians now is that they're this sort of savage, brutal attacker that are uncouth, unskilled, and uncivilized. In previous editions of the game, you actually had to spend skill points to make your barbarian literate and able to read and write. So it used to be that the game's rules were really promoting this stereotype. But what if the barbarian's rage ability wasn't just an "I get real angry and hit stuff" kind of ability? Say that in your world maybe there are some monk schools. Your character goes to one of these schools as a child and studies the way of the martial arts. While others in his level begin to sort of develop their monk abilities and manifest ki points, you find that your favored training centers on attaining trance and meditation rather than exploring movement. So you look inward toward yourself, where the other traditional monks look outward toward the world. In this way, you've set yourself up to be a barbarian class with monk flavor. In this barbarian monk's meditative state, their body becomes more lethal because they're fully aware of the self. Their strikes do more damage, not because they know where to hit, but because their body generates that damage through its meditation. They take less damage because the trance state they enter hardens their muscles and skin and protects them. They stay in focus in this meditative fugue state by performing acts that pit the universe against their own body, and if they find no adversity in that moment, they come out of the trance for want of stimulus. Mechanically, this would equal out to entering rage and taking reduced damage, and when they don't deal or receive damage that round, they come out of rage the same as it always is. But it breaks this stereotype of the brutish barbarian. You can play a barbarian with high intelligence or whatever, and it wouldn't be out of the ordinary if you were using a trope like this one. They are a monk, after all. It would be a really fun character to play, I think. You could go Ancestral Guardian Barbarian and be guided by the spirits of the ancestors of the monastery from which you hail. Your abilities can be flavored as monkish abilities simply by changing the names, but mechanically nothing different happens. In fact, now that I think about it, any type of warrior that enters into a trance-like state could work well to be the barbarian flavor. You don't always have to be the low-intelligent brute with a big axe. This is a nice little setup. I hope that's actually working. Clerics are so varied of a class that I shouldn't even have to talk about them. The sheer amount of domains that they get access to makes them, as I have mentioned in a previous video, one of the most widely ranged classes in the game. I will perhaps do a video one day just to show how an entire party of 5 or 6 people could be made of clerics only and still be balanced. We're gonna leave clerics sort of where they are for now and maybe come back to them at another time. Now, druids are admittedly pretty samey as well these days when you really look at them. I mean, their whole aesthetic is that they're the protectors and keepers of the sacred woods, and they have affinity for the wilds and the like. They're the sort of hippie type characters in the game. So, how can we play that differently? Well, let's turn the druid into a mad scientist. Turn the nature class back on itself and make it draw its abilities from the inexorable march of scientific progress rather than the nature from which they come. Get ready, this one's gonna be good. Druids do a couple things exceptionally well. They turn into animals and they cast nature spells. So, this character is an alchemist who's been experimenting with potions and tinctures that contain bits of animals in them. His goal maybe originally was to simply imbue the concoctions just with like an aspect of the animal in question. Maybe a potion to toughen the skin made from a bear, or to weaken the effects of cold based on the biology of a fish, or whatever. But in finding nobody willing to be his test subjects, because who's just gonna drink a random serum with a bunch of fish parts in it, he resorted to testing them on himself, and found that they worked far better than he had expected, than he could have possibly imagined. He found that by purposefully mixing together the aspects of all the animals that he was working with, he could invoke those animals by concentrating on them and actually transform his physical body into that of the animal in question, but retain his intellect. I mean, sure, the serums wear off once they're activated, but it's a fantastic transformation. He starts knowing the formulae for only some simpler animals that don't have very different biology from mammalians, perhaps. Stuff that he doesn't need to swim very hard for or be able to fly for. Stuff that doesn't have terrifying poison abilities or something like that yet, just like a normal druid would. But as he studies and experiments more, or in other words, grows in level, he gradually synthesizes more and more creatures into this serum and can call from the greater sea of creature DNA. He'd have to take Circle of the Moon, obviously, so to continue to grow and grow in that collection of bodily changes, that would be the circle he'd take. Most of the spell list can be flavored from this as well. I mean, many of the spells are sort of aspects of a creature or creature related, so that they too can be inherent abilities granted by this serum. You've got Speak with Animals, Beast Sense, even things like Polymorph and Windwalk. All of them are the side effects of this research that he's been doing. Now, of course, since druids have to prepare their spells with a nightly ritual that draws the magic up from the earth, this druid will prepare his spells for the day by spending some time with his alchemist's kit and his notebooks to synthesize the serums necessary for the next day. Obviously, the serums don't work on anybody else, they only work on him because of his prolonged exposure to them with his research, which changed his biology profoundly enough that his body can accept and use the serums he makes for himself. Once he reaches the level of Timeless Body at 17 or 18, I don't remember which, he's found the serum that stops his body from aging, perhaps maybe based off of jellyfish DNA, and gladly takes it. I mean, after all, living forever does give you a lot of time for science. And then at level 20, with Archdruid, he's used so much of the serums on his own body that it begins to simply produce them by itself, and he doesn't need to make them anymore. Well, not for himself. Now, his new test subjects, on the other hand. You guys, there's just so many more stereotypes to break with these base character classes, I think we're gonna have to do a second video. Turn in for part 2 really soon. This is a lot of fun to do, breaking the stereotypes and making characters into these sort of unique and fun archetypes that don't normally see the light of day in a D&D campaign. Well, as always, if you appreciate the looks into characters and how to make them unique and cool, you can show your support by taking a second to click on the Patreon link that's down in the description box. I'd really appreciate it, and you'd put me one step closer to being able to do all the stuff I want to do with my life, and none of the stuff that I don't want to do. You can find a few flavor conversion write-ups that I mentioned here as PDFs on Patreon, where you can grab them for free. Obviously, you don't need to be a patron to get your hands on the stuff from this series. That would be a dick move to do. But I look forward to the next time we meet, friends, and as always, happy rolling.